Good morning. I, Salome Wessels, and Martine Demba will be presenting the following work from Group C of the ISF Honours students. As previously mentioned, we form part of a team of 7 students that worked in Moreleta Park, Pretoria, specifically the 2 informal settlements of Plastic and Cemetery View. Herewith a few slides to refresh your memory on the references to Q1 research, as well as the larger group structure and smaller group splits that took place over time. As indicated, Martine and myself continued to work together throughout the entirety of this project. The ethos of the Urban Citizen Studio follows the notion of socially engaged architecture regarding methods of design generation that upholds the partnership between architect expert and user expert. Communities are to be placed at the forefront of a co-design process in order to critically engage in socio-spatial architectural design. Here were the various stakeholders that were established in the co-design process, with special mention of our primary stakeholders in red, due to their involvement and relation to our group's research direction. Please familiarize yourself with the referencing style outlined in this slide, as we will reference the inputs from stakeholders in this way.
The successful 7-week semester displayed a range of exchange that took place between stakeholders and students. This timeline provides an overview of all the key engagements with stakeholders and the web-based tools that were used. To analyze or read architecture through the lens and belief of a sole author imposes preconceived limits on the agency of interventions and the contributions of numerous actors in the process of spatial production. As stated before, the theory of co-authorship was applied at the inception of the project by involving stakeholders into the co-design of the brief. Key principles were then confirmed by stakeholders and noted in red.
Week 4 and 5 hosted multiple stakeholder engagements around the initial co-generation and co-evaluation of conceptual ideas. Multiple inputs and discussions over these 2 weeks accumulated into a design approach that considers community and people as the primary source of energy, and perhaps force for change in these settlements. The initial design concepts considered by us in the early stages both revealed an underlying inclination towards networks and intangible assets. In order to conduct effective stakeholder engagements, we joined forces and trusted the co-design process to guide us further. The notion of people as assets are highlighted in the following 3 theoretical considerations: the well-being economy, social capital, and spatial agency. Investing in social capital and working towards the recognition of the informal sector has the potential to steer these communities to greater well-being and self-sufficiency. An emphasis is placed on the idea of uniting people with various knowledge and skill sets in order to thrive beyond the limitations of their urban location and the strict vertical economy, as stressed by Prof. Ferramonti.
Jeremy Till and Nishant Awan suggest that to design spatially means to encompass the wider sense of space, physical, social, metaphorical, and phenomenological aspects, and by this regard, one could even include non-spatial space. By using platforms of community engagement, the concept remained fluid enough to consider and absorb possibilities of non-spatial operations. Before developing ways of fostering engagement or conversation, it required us to understand the current challenges within the Moreleta Park neighborhood with references to social capital. Additionally, the highlighted challenges from stakeholders were considered. At this point, it became relevant to find a way to render the concept of social capital interventions applicable and more tangible to the concept of plastic view. Guided by proposal of Dragos Daskalou, we developed an intervention strategy that would manage a sensitive and effective approach in our architectural design.
Presented here is our 4-step strategy set out to build social capital and foster trust and cooperation. Building reputation, intervening in the everyday, small incremental efforts, and future prospect space. This will be explained further in the slides to follow. Building reputation entails the transformation of perspectives, how the village residents view themselves and how others come to view them. It addresses the idea that to foster trust and integration in the neighborhood, the stigma around the informal settlements need to change. Human voices and stories from the people of the settlement are important to share and are envisioned to take form in a campaign of some sort.
Intervening in the everyday, being perceptive of the places that people already occupy and use, can help foster buy-in and cooperation from a community. With stakeholders' input, we identified a few potential areas in the vicinity of Plastic View to serve as emergent places for engagement or meeting. The entrance area, SPAZA shops, and other areas identified were then further analyzed in terms of their activities, deducing ways in which community members interact and gather.
Small incremental efforts are interventions that in simple ways start to build self-determination and reduce the social distance between networks and individuals. Incremental efforts provide interim rewards and accomplishment for users in small moments of skills gained, exposure, union, or emotional well-being. Precedent studies derived from earlier engagements and desktop studies were discussed with stakeholders and internalized with key principles informing our direction set out below. The experimental value of these precedents were considered pivotal in the way they prepare communities for greater goals.
Many of the analyzed precedents revealed progression into architectonic spaces or bigger projects over time. Similarly, the future prospect space refers to what the incremental efforts can become. Physical and non-physical small incremental efforts simulate the multifunctionality of a building or space by bringing several ideas, individuals, activities into a coexistence. Users tasked to negotiate and reach an understanding based on trust, resulting in a bonded group of people that can pioneer and grow a project in complexity. The involved users will end up determining the ultimate function, form, or use of their communal future prospect space, as well as the development, if needed, of supporting communication and electronic resources or platforms.
This type of coming together for mutual gain has been previously exemplified in Plastic View. As a community, they independently funded and constructed water stands and two long drainage channels in the settlement. The men frequently organized soccer league matches, and recently, during the pandemic, the settlement raised money to support a local radio station as thanks for the station's continual concern for the villagers.
With the basic framework set out, we furthered our investigation into the step of small incremental efforts, asking how small interventions can have agency in mobilizing self-determination, fostering community connections, and providing beneficial opportunities and advances in this context. Existing networks, currently operating in isolation to one another, were analyzed through their potential collaborative links. The highlighted threads indicate the network and associated skills with strong linkages selected to be taken forward.
Small indications of community convergence within the settlement informed a grip on the spatial articulation of comfortable spaces for engagement. The 7 elements below were concluded from the analysis and further classified according to their relevance to step 3 and 4 of the strategy. An understanding of the form and structures realized within the settlement informed ideas of movability, placement, and modularity of our interventions. These considerations were further substantiated by ideas of the circular economy. Building on the precedents and these side findings, we propose that an incremental intervention can be as simple as a chair or a table or a piece of fabric hooked onto wire. Made with local expressions of skills and materials, these objects are able to transform and articulate everyday spaces into places of engagement, prompting spatial and social reactions and facilitating exchange and the building of networks. Herewith, a few conceptual explorations conducted into how locally crafted dispositives can transform the everyday and foster community engagement in Plastic View.
Discussions in week 7 led to the renewed review of the SPAZA shop network and educational initiatives in the settlements as they pertain to our ongoing investigation. We came to test the relevance of architecture as dispositive with graphical activities and questions completed by stakeholders and 2 residents of the settlements through a workshop by proxy arrangement. The activities allowed for the community itself to surface the most applicable dispositives and indicate the preferred atmospheres for places of everyday engagement. The concluding statements were considered towards the final outcomes. To test our assumption on this positive, a final stakeholder engagement led to a small-scale scenario on Wednesday from 12 to 5 when chairs were randomly placed in front of a SPAZA shop. The setup attracted some unexpected guests, as captured on the right by proxy. Children are seen occupying the space and even rearrange the chairs, confirming William White's theory of the movable chair and the social life of small urban spaces, as well as our own investigations on the value of dispositive for insight and simulation.
Synthesizing the information and exploration to this point led to the emergence of two proposals as focus areas for incremental efforts and places of engagement, namely the decision-making space and the SPAZA workshop. The decision-making space surfaced from the idea of articulating areas to provide more platforms for fellowship, education, or rest in the settlement. The decision-making space is an everyday space that, with the presence of dispositives, table or canopy, allows people to gather and start to converse. Deceivingly unremarkable, these spaces can in fact instigate and facilitate important decision-making or networking between different individuals in the settlement. As an initial suggestion, these spaces can be linked in proximity to the residence of members of the Power of the Father structure or SPAZA shops. The canopy's role as a shading device and a location indicator makes it highly useful for gathering and workable spaces. The following preliminary technical construction engages with the local skills, crafts networks, and low-cost fixings known to the community. The idea is for the design of these elements to be adapted by crafters and users as sees fit.
The SPAZA workshop as our second proposal presents further opportunities for network awareness and mutual benefits realization. The activities of two networks, SPAZA shops and weaving ladies, along with an educational pseudocurrency system for children, as investigated by a fellow Group B member, could achieve a small circular economic loop of various benefits. Other networks can start to collaborate with them too, such as Invelo. SPAZA shops already are sources of attraction to adults and children, but it could have the potential to become combined learning, working, eating, buying, and socializing spaces. This is especially informed through scenarios as seen in page 78, where devices used for work can double as play elements. For these several proposed activities to coexist, users must start to negotiate and come to an understanding based on trust and cooperation within a shared space. This multifunctionality could then be reflected into a bigger space or more instances if needed.
Reflecting upon the overall co-design process followed, it became quite evident for us to establish our position within the spectrum represented by this diagram. Our project is located strongly within the idea of emergence, as it became apparent to us that the sensitive and complex aspects of networks requires a greater involvement and sense of ownership from the end users. The following graphic represents our group's own authorship position in terms of ideation, design development, production, and use and habitation.
According to Lee, creative design thinking is achieved by facilitating the mixing of the abstract, such as networks from an architect's perspective, and the concrete realms, such as the everyday spaces and dispositive. Furthermore, incorporating the notion of knowledge sharing, which entails that spatial agents should understand knowledge as space production, thus also suggesting epistemic emergence, where space in all its forms should benefit from the realm of users' input. In our deliverable, emergence is ensured through the versatility of the strategy and the potential options that could surface from it, ultimately allowing the residents to choose the best options and create something greater. Still somewhat entangled between the strategic, intangible, and physical accounts of our project proposal, the work of Cora as a precedent was considered to navigate our agglomerate contribution to spatial agency and the architectural discourse.
Our final deliverable is hence conceived as both a toolkit and resource for the realization of spatial agency within the community of Plastic View and beyond. The combination of strategy, coordination of networks, processes, common objects, and spatial suggestions are packaged to activate community engagement. Engagement through interaction and sharing of ideas, and also engagement through the collaborative shaping of users' own environments. This graphic merely represents the different strands of the toolkit and how they relate to one another. Each component represented on the chart is an information source or card that cross-relates between data sets, dispositive, scenario, and strategies in building social capital. Design developments undertaken by research and partners for the past 8 weeks are to form the basis of this toolkit upon which new information and input can be added. The cards themselves are in this way also dispositives or instruments for conversation, collaboration, and the trial and development of smaller to bigger scale interventions.
The toolkit we propose is an open source methodology that retains information on networks and ideas, and is also receptive to further additions from stakeholders, users, or experts in discussions. Informal settlement settings are unpredictable and should embrace the indeterminacy proposed by Jeremy Till. Concepts of dispositives and scenarios remain relatively open-ended for discussions or improvements, which allow the testing of the strategy in various informal settings. It is up to the community to take control and head into the direction best suited for their own situation, aiding in community ownership. The following is a representation of how all the parts of the toolkit work in unison. And as one last thought, going forward, what if we tried just to see? Thank you.